All right, so today we're going to be tackling bird flu, H5N1. And it's definitely a topic that's been getting a lot of attention recently, and for good reason. So whether you're prepping for like a meeting, or maybe you just need like a little refresher, or maybe you're just super curious, this deep dive is going to bring you up to speed on H5N1 and why scientists are so concerned that it could potentially become the next pandemic. So to do this, we've got a couple of sources to unpack today. First, we're going to be looking at a really interesting discussion thread from Reddit's Futurology subreddit. Those folks are always thinking ahead. Then we're going to be checking out a report from Scientific American, which really breaks down all the latest research. And what makes all this so urgent is that H5N1 isn't just, lurking out there somewhere in some distant jungle. It's already here in the US. It's on farms, and it may be just one mutation away from spreading easily between humans.
Yeah.
To get us started, can you just give us a clear picture of what exactly is H5N1 and why is this particular strain making headlines?
So H5N1 is a type of avian influenza virus, or more commonly known as bird flu. It's actually been circulating among our birds for a long time. But this specific strain, it's taken a kind of worrying turn. It's jumped to other animals. And the fact that it's now in over 500 dairy herds across 15 U.S. states has definitely caught scientists' attention.
Wow, over 500 herds. That's a lot. And it's not just cows either, right? I was reading that bears, foxes, even marine mammals have been affected. It's a pretty diverse range, and it's, right here in the U.S., not some far-off problem.
Exactly. And, that's definitely part of what's raising concern. But what really set off the alarm bells was some new research that was published in Science. And this study suggests that a single mutation in a specific H5N1 protein could make it bind much more efficiently to human cells, particularly in our upper respiratory tract, so our nose and throat. And that makes a huge difference when it comes to human transmission.
Okay, I see why people are worried now. So can you break down for us, how does this mutation actually make it easier for the virus to spread between people?
Okay, so think about how past pandemic influenza viruses, they needed at least 2 mutations to bind efficiently to human cells, right? But this strain, this one might only need 1. And what this mutation does is it alters a protein on the surface of the virus, and this allows it to attach more readily to receptors in our upper respiratory tract, which means, coughing or sneezing could become much more effective ways to spread the virus.
So how much of a concern is this mutation in reality? Should we be preparing for a pandemic?
Well, the mutated H5N1 protein they looked at in the study, while it did show stronger binding to human receptors, it's still bound kind of weakly. However, it did bind more strongly than the 2009 H1N1 virus that caused the swine flu pandemic. So while we can't say definitively that it will lead to a pandemic, it's definitely a significant development that we need to monitor very closely.
It's a chilling thought. Even a weak initial infection could potentially spark a pandemic if the conditions are right.
Yeah, that's right. And there's another really crucial point here. Just because a virus can bind to human cells doesn't necessarily guarantee that it'll actually cause disease. Its ability to replicate within the human body also plays a crucial role.
That's true. And, I remember reading about that teenager in Canada who was hospitalized with a similar strain of H5N1. Doesn't that suggest that the virus is already adapting to human cells?
Yeah, it definitely raises some concerns. That particular strain they found had mutations in similar areas to the ones that they were studying in this research, and it certainly suggests that, the virus might be getting better at infecting humans. And what's particularly interesting here is that most human bird flu cases this year have been relatively mild.
Right. That's actually what I was going to ask about. If this strain is so dangerous, why haven't we seen more severe cases?
Well, the severity of the illness really depends on where the virus binds in our respiratory tract. Most human cases so far have involved the virus targeting cells in the lower respiratory tract. And that typically leads to severe pneumonia, which is serious, but less likely to spread easily. However, if it starts binding more in the upper respiratory tract, like this research suggests is possible, it could cause more common cold-like symptoms.
And a virus that causes mild cold-like symptoms is much more likely to spread rapidly, right? Because people might not even realize they're contagious.
Exactly. Think about it. Think about all the people you encounter in a day if you have a cold versus when you have pneumonia. The potential for transmission is vastly different.
Right. That makes this mutation even more concerning. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about preparedness. Could we actually handle an H5N1 pandemic if it did happen?
Well, to get a sense of all the diverse viewpoints out there, we can turn to that Reddit thread that we mentioned earlier. Users there have expressed a really wide range of opinions, from optimism to, very deep concern.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Some users are putting their faith in advancements like mRNA vaccines and antiviral treatments, and they seem to believe that we're in a much better position to handle a pandemic now than we were just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely a valid point. And the development of mRNA vaccines has been groundbreaking. But we also have to consider the other side of the coin. Several Reddit users brought up some pretty critical issues, like vaccine hesitancy, political roadblocks, and even the possibility of a global food crisis if this virus starts to impact livestock production.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to get caught up in all the excitement of scientific advancements and forget about the real-world challenges that could actually hinder our response. Speaking of vaccines, don't we already have some for H5N1? Would those even be effective against this potentially mutated strain?
We do have pre-existing vaccines for certain H5N1 strains, and those might offer some level of protection. But it's unclear how effective they would actually be against a newly mutated human-adapted strain. And even if we could rapidly develop a new vaccine, which is certainly possible, given what we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, there's still a crucial question. Will we have the global cooperation and the political will to distribute it effectively? This brings us to a really crucial point about the social and political dimensions of pandemic preparedness, which we'll delve into after a quick break.
Yeah, that question of global cooperation you just raised, it's such a crucial one. It seems like even with, all the scientific progress we've made, we're still struggling with those big picture issues of preparedness. One Reddit user even commented that focusing just on vaccines and treatments.
Yeah, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. That's a really striking analogy. And it kind of speaks to a broader point. It's not enough to just have the scientific tools. We need the social and political frameworks in place to actually use those tools effectively. So equitable access, overcoming misinformation, fostering global cooperation. Those are all challenges that we really need to address head on.
It's like we're navigating a minefield, trying to balance those incredible scientific advances with the very complex realities of our world. We have these powerful tools, but without the collective will and the systems to deploy them effectively, we're still vulnerable.
Absolutely. And that vulnerability is only amplified by just how interconnected our world is today. A virus can literally travel across the globe in a matter of hours, which makes containment and control so much more challenging.
Yeah, and reading through those Reddit comments really highlighted those anxieties. One user pointed out that even with the COVID-19 pandemic, still fresh in our minds, look how quickly we've kind of slipped back into old patterns. They were worried that we're not taking the lessons we learned seriously enough.
That's a valid concern, and it really underscores the need for continuous learning and adaptation. What we're seeing with this particular strain of H5N1 is a reminder that we're in a constant evolutionary race with viruses. The fact that it might only require a single mutation to become more transmissible to humans is a real wake-up call. Previously, pandemic influenza viruses, they typically needed at least 2 mutations.
So does this mean we're heading into a future where pandemics become even more frequent and more severe? Are we just getting lucky so far?
Well, that's a question that weighs heavily on the minds of a lot of scientists and policymakers. The convergence of factors like climate change, deforestation, and intensive agricultural practices is creating these ideal breeding grounds for new viruses. And as global travel and trade continues to increase, the opportunities for those viruses to spread rapidly are only going to multiply.
It's almost like we're living in a real-life science fiction thriller. The stakes feel so incredibly high.
In a sense, we are. And just like in those thrillers, the decisions we make today will have a profound impact on our future. Investing in scientific research, strengthening public health infrastructure, and cultivating global cooperation. Those are no longer optional. They're necessities.
One of the most insightful comments I read on Reddit emphasized that pandemic preparedness shouldn't be viewed as like a burden or a political issue, but rather as an investment in our collective future.
That's a powerful way to frame it. We need to shift our mindset from one of reaction to one of proaction. We can't afford to wait for the next pandemic to hit before we start taking action.
So if we kind of zoom out from the specifics of H5N1, what broader lessons can we draw about pandemic preparedness in general?
The key takeaway here is that we need to think holistically. H5N1 is just one example of the many threats that we face. Whether it's a novel influenza virus, a coronavirus, or something entirely unforeseen, the principles of preparedness remain the same. We need robust surveillance systems to detect threats early, rapid response mechanisms to contain outbreaks, and effective communication strategies to keep the public informed and engaged.
One user on Reddit made a point that really resonated with me. They said that we need to stop thinking about pandemic preparedness as something separate from our everyday lives, and we need to start integrating it into the fabric of our society.
I completely agree. It's about fostering a culture of preparedness, where individuals, communities, and governments all work together to build resilience.
So what does that actually look like in practice? What can we as individuals do to be more prepared beyond just stocking up on masks and hand sanitizer?
Well, it starts with awareness.
Yeah.
Educate yourself about the potential threats, understand the science behind pandemics, and stay informed about the latest developments.
It's interesting. One of the things that struck me while I was reading through that Reddit thread was how many people were drawing parallels between pandemic preparedness and climate change. Like they were saying that both require us to think long-term, to make changes now, to prevent a potentially catastrophic future.
That's a really powerful comparison. Both challenges definitely require like a fundamental shift in our mindset, from short-term thinking to long-term sustainability. And both demand collective action, not just individual effort.
It seems like one of the biggest hurdles we face is overcoming that sense of apathy. That it won't happen to me mentality. How do we convince people that pandemic preparedness is something they should care about, even when there's not an immediate threat?
I think it's about connecting the dots, showing people how these seemingly distant threats can have very real and very personal consequences. For example, a pandemic could disrupt global supply chains, and that could lead to shortages of essential goods like food and medicine, could overwhelm healthcare systems, making it really difficult to access care for even routine illnesses. And it could lead to widespread economic instability, affecting jobs, businesses, and livelihoods.
Yeah, that's a really effective way to frame it, bringing it down to the level of everyday life. It makes the threat feel much more real and tangible.
Exactly. And another really important aspect of preparedness is building community resilience, knowing your neighbors, understanding your community's resources, and having a plan in place for how you'll support each other in an emergency can make a world of difference.
One Reddit user shared a story about how their neighborhood formed a mutual aid network during the COVID-19 pandemic. And they checked in on elderly neighbors. They shared groceries. And they even organized online social events to combat isolation. It was really inspiring to see how people came together in a time of crisis.
That's a fantastic example of community resilience in action. And, it really highlights the fact that preparedness isn't just about physical resources. It's also about social connectedness and a willingness to help one another.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what key takeaways should we leave our listeners with? What are the most crucial things to remember about H5N1 and the broader issue of pandemic preparedness?
Okay, well, first and foremost, H5N1 is a serious threat that we need to monitor very closely. That possibility of single mutation making it much more transmissible to humans is a really stark reminder that we live in a world where these kinds of threats are constantly evolving.
Yeah, like a ticking time bomb. That we need to be prepared to diffuse.
Precisely. And second, while this deep dive focused on H5N1, the lessons we've discussed today apply to a whole spectrum of potential pandemic threats. Building a resilient society means being prepared for a range of challenges.
Of emerging viruses.
So natural disasters.
To economic disruptions.
It's about recognizing that our world is interconnected and that these events, while they may seem distant at times, can have a ripple effect that touches every aspect of our life.
Exactly. And finally, the good news is that we have the knowledge and the tools to mitigate these risks. We've made incredible strides in scientific research, public health infrastructure, and global cooperation.
But as we've discussed, having those tools is only half the battle, right? We need the collective will to use them effectively, to make informed decisions, to prioritize public health, to work together to build a more resilient future.
That's the challenge and the opportunity. I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive was about H5N1, but it was also about something much bigger. It was about our collective responsibility to create a world where we're prepared for the challenges ahead. So we encourage you to continue exploring this topic, share your thoughts and questions, and be a part of the conversation. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay well.